Okay, here we have your cut up line. This is your main here. Here's your starters. This starter would go for your 50 horsepower motor. We do not have that hooked up because we don't know exactly the distance that you will have to hook from here to your motor. So you will have to wire this starter here, which it says 50 horsepower on the bottom, to your motor on your saw. This is the motor to control your hydraulic power pack, which is your pump underneath, which I'll show you in a minute. These fuses are for your 50 horsepower motor, and these are your fuses for your 15 horse. These fuses here will work with the same fuses that you have as spares in your box on your machine. Control transformer here, main here, hook your 3 leads into the top, and here's your grounding bar here. You can move that, like I said, in the box, whichever way you decide to go. Okay. Start stop buttons. Start for your 50, stop for your 50, start for your 15, stop for your 15. These are spare buttons that you can use on your machine control panel box. They're not even wired up in here. So if you ever have one, I just had them to mount them in this box so that they would be spares that you could get to. Here are your control valves. This would be log deck cylinder 1. That's what the LD stands for. Log deck cylinder 2. Log deck motor. Log deck motor. In-feed, which would be your in-feed coming from your saw to your saw. Then your hold down, which would hold your wood down, is this valve. And then your saw here. And then your outfeed, which is what pulls it over to your kicker. This is the valve we had to install here additionally to make your kicker work. All this looks like this because we had it installed, but this will all be painted and cleaned up. Just figured I'd tell you that. This kicker here will operate your kicker down at the end, which is here. This kicker will rotate. Now, the way we built this kicker is bolted onto this plate here. As you can see, it's bolted in 4 places, 4 bolts here, 4 bolts there. We're going to have to take this off to ship it to you. So what we recommend you doing is, when you get it here and you put it back on, put these bolts back in, tighten these bolts down, and then weld from this tubing over to lock this on permanently, because these bolts right here over time will not be enough to sustain it to stay. So you'd want to weld something from here to here just to give it a little bit of support on all 4 posts. Here would be your other post here, so you do the same thing here. And when we unbolt it, your connections and stuff would stay, all of this would stay fixed to it. And these wires, or these hoses here that hook to your motor up top, will just be hanging and attached to this. So this will unbolt, and you will have to put this back on when it gets there. Now let's walk down here. All of these hydraulic hoses here are all color coordinated. Black, black, red, red, gray, gray, yellow, yellow, orange, orange, and so on through here. So we'll disconnect all of these hoses from here, and we'll put them in this wad, and just in this wad wrapped up here with caps on it. We'll just lay it down up here. So when you go to get it back, you can hook these up. Now, if for some reason you want the lever to go in the opposite direction, what you would do is come down to, say, like your motor. Say, like if you wanted to pull your motor backwards to make it go forward, then you would just swap these lines here after you get it assembled, and then that way you would be able to make the valve, say, push forward or reverse to make them swap. You just swap these lines. Same thing applies on your log deck here on this cylinder. You could swap either of these hoses to make your valves work the same. Your two valves, the ones that work your cylinder, you would want those, say like if you were to pull them back, you would want them to dump forward and then push forward to pull back. Same thing here. You just swap any two of these when you get it back to make the valve work the opposite direction. These cylinders here, same thing. Same thing here. See, white, blue. It doesn't really matter which way you put it, it's just all in how you want the valve to operate. You know, pulling forward or backward. If we go down and look at it from this end, this would be your end feed going into your saw. Then your log decks. The spacing in between will be on your print that I send to you. Now, on your saw, when we ship your saw, because of the height of your saw, we'll have to unbolt these bearings here, here, and here, and then we would remove this whole top portion. So when you go to put it back on, you'll have this pin here. This cylinder, this pin will pull out, and this cylinder will just lay down here, and the pin will be in here, and this whole top portion of the saw would come off. And then we would ship this as one piece, and then this piece here with the motor attached as one piece. This is the motor that your electrician will have to hook up. See here, from the bottom of here, 3 wires in your ground going back around to your main control panel box. Here can go into the bottom or wherever you decide you want to go. That's your preference or his preference or whoever wires it up. Your hydraulic pump, same thing. All of this will be pre-wired and attached. You won't have to do anything here. There's your cooler, your filter, your tank, level here, and temperature gauge. Motor, pump, maintenance on your moving parts. You have a bearing here and a bearing here on each end. You would grease these here, and then on your idle end you have a plastic UHMW sprocket that has a grease fitting that's actually on it. So if you can see, the grease fitting is here. So you have a grease fitting here, one on this bearing and one on this bearing. It's the same thing on your log decks, and it's the same thing on your end feed. They would both be the same. Now the spacing on the deck, if you can see here where your hold down is, generally what I try to say is from your hold down here to your log deck, you'd like to have about 3 to 4 feet in here so that your butt can hang over a little bit if you've got tree length wood in this area, and give you enough room to roll a piece of wood in there, which I'll put that on your print. Here, these log decks obviously are not sitting exactly like they would need to go, but you would pull this log deck, and what you want to do is put this as close to this as you can so that this sprocket and chain where it makes the rotation here will have room to clear, and then you'll come back off of here with some kind of flat bar or something in here to kind of keep stuff or your wood from falling into here. But usually you can get these close enough to this that you don't have to put anything but just maybe some bar or something across here to keep wood from falling in, depending on what length you get of wood you're buying. That tie-in would need to be made. Same thing would apply here for this deck. Down here at the end, this is the end of your end feed here. You'd want this sprocket to be flush with this tubing here, maybe 2 to 3 inches inside of it. So that if you're looking at it like this, you'd want this chain here to be sitting right along in here somewhere, so that your guard is in the outside of your guard here is inside of this frame here, which would give you about 10 feet in between your two log decks. Let's see here. Your saw, as you're sitting here, your saw, to start with, your saw, you'd want to get it as close to you could, so that when you set the end feed, you want the center of your saw mandle shaft here. So you'd want the center of the saw centered on the center of the shaft when you set it up. And the distance between this chain and this chain between the saw, you'd like to have about 6 inches. I'd say 3 to 6 inches from this chain to this chain, so that you have a total of 6 inches in here of clearance, so that your saw, in case it ever gets any wobble in it, will have a little bit of room to wobble back and forth without hitting any of this. And some of your debris can fall onto the ground here. Anchor points on all of this, if you see here, there's anchor points here on the bottom of every leg, here on your log deck too, on everywhere. You just use some 5/8 red heads to put down, or anchor bolts into your concrete. Now on your saw frame, once you get it in place, you've got several anchor points. You've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 anchor points. This needs to be anchored very well. You don't want it moving as you're going up and down with your saw or rocking back and forth. So that's very important.